Nerdrotic.com.
To Kelly Sue DeConnick, Dan Slott, Mark Wade, Tom King, Donnie Cates, told you so. We effing told you so. There was a comic book movement called Comicsgate. It started out genuinely with customers being upset with what was happening to their favorite characters inside their favorite stories. Partisan, political provocateurs were vandalizing Captain America, Spider-Man, Batman, and Superman while going on Twitter and insulting fans with impunity without any consequence whatsoever, not being called out by their bosses because their bosses, the editorial staff at Marvel and DC, completely agreed with them, and they decided to partake in some of the pastime that has now been attacking the fan, which is the favorite pastime of the comic book creative. Now your industry is nothing but a clique, and now the comic book retailing industry is nothing but a charity. Thanks to you. Despite what some may say, I am not Comicsgate, but I do support pesky little things like respecting the paying customer. Yes, I'm a little pissed. Yes, I'm taking time out of my very busy schedule from moving out of San Francisco, that's a video for another day, to talk about this. Get woke, go broke. Who didn't see this coming? A bloodbath at DC. They are currently bathing in the blood of their editorial staff. Some of them are legends like Bob Harris, and some of them deserve to go. And I truly am sorry for the innocent parties who got caught up in this, but you should have spoke up, just like the comic shops, and I will talk about that in a little bit. You know, it reminds me, I'm wearing my ratty Comic Outpost shirt right now. It was a little over a year and a half ago where I had a little lunch meeting with Brian Hibbs, who was the person who bought my store. Yes, I used to own a comic shop here in San Francisco. Here's the meme. And I was considering purchasing my comic store back. He had offered it to me at a ridiculous price. I eventually said no, and thank God. Getting out of the comic book industry in 2013, although that wasn't my original plan, was the best thing I could have done. It's the best decision I could have made because I avoided SJW Marvel and SJW DC, and we are now seeing the consequences of all of this. We'll start at The Hollywood Reporter. DC Comics DC Universe hit by major layoffs. The majority of staff of the streaming service DC Universe has been laid off. I did a video on this a year ago and got the same reaction as I got when I warned that this might be happening to the comic book industry. And I know I'm not the only one who was warning this stuff would happen. Ethan Van Sciver talked about it quite some time ago. So did Mark Millar. Clownfish TV has been on top of this as well, as has editor-in-chief Bob Harris, who is a legend. I am sorry to see him go, and multiple other executives on the publishing side. Let's see if they went far enough. Monday's Warner Media layoffs have affected a significant number of high-level figures at comic book powerhouse DC. Multiple sources tell The Hollywood Reporter. I sure as hell hope Andy Corey is on that list. He's the blogger who infiltrated DC and destroyed Vertigo and its replacement, the Black Label. Among those said to be losing their positions are editor-in-chief Bob Harris, truly sorry to see him go, Senior VP of Publishing Strategy and Support Services Hank Canals, VP of Marketing and Creative Services Jonah Weiland, VP Global Publishing Initiatives and Digital Strategy Bobby Chase. My God, these corporate freaking titles. Senior Story Editor Brian Cunningham and Executive Editor Mark Doyle, who oversaw the rollout of the Black Label graphic novels, which of course was supposed to replace Vertigo, and some were edited by Andy Corey, the personal partisan provocateur, along with many others who hired Zoe Quinn. Jim Lee remains the CCO. I'm not sure why. He has spent his time doodling. Oh, and this one is bad, especially bad for the comic shops. Also a victim of the layoffs, DC Direct, the company's in-house merchandise and collectibles manufacturer. The division has been shuttered after 22 years. Another move that was rumored when Warner Brothers Consumer Products began taking a more active role in DC merchandising. There's some language in another article we're going to go over that spells the end of the modern comic shop. A DC spokesperson declined to comment on the changes, which come less than 2 weeks before the planned August 22nd online event, DC Fandom, which is set to showcase stars from DC films, TV, and comic book worlds. Honestly, I don't think Warner Brothers has a problem doing this before this virtual fandom event. We've already seen the atrocious Con Zealand and the horrific San Diego Comic-Con at home. Again, San Diego Comic-Con had atrocious content and atrocious numbers, and I'm guessing Warner Brothers is regretting that they're putting on this virtual con at all, and they're not worried about it. They said up front, they mean business, and that's why we are observing this bloodbath right now. A separate report from Bleeding Stool's Rich Johnston also detailed a number of others who were axed, including editor Andy Corey. Good. Jim Lee's executive assistant, Eddie Choi, international publishing, ad sales, and custom creative studios, Sandy Resnick, and marketing director, Sarah Haskell. Now, this all comes from Warner's CEO, Jason Killer. If that's how you pronounce his name, it's very appropriate. He talks about streamlining for the consumer. I don't like that term, but that's what he used. This is the language I was talking about that has comic shops worried, and they should be. He then detailed these changes represent prioritizing three different things. Number one, a consumer orientation far more than a wholesale orientation. Number two, going direct to consumer. And number three, going global. Now, you may think that direct to consumer might be talking about streaming, and he may be, but I'm guessing he's also talking about comic books. He also notes that DC Comics will put a greater emphasis on digital and bookstores rather than the comic book shop. Well, I guess that answers that. This brings us to the Wonder Woman 1984 Rooster Teeth cover. What does this have to do with the decisions being made by Warner Brothers that are currently rocking the comic book industry? Absolutely nothing. Yet, it is the result. It is the culmination of all the fan abuse, of all the character vandalization that has gone on in the comic book industry over the last 4 years. I've always believed there was a synergy in life, and the universe tends to unfold as it should. And this is a display of the attitude towards the comic book fan, the comic book fan that is being abandoned right now, along with the comic shops, that is on display right here. DC has their snowflake and safe space. Now, anytime anybody creative puts part of themselves out there in the public, you are open to criticism, and it's how you react to that criticism shows how confident you are in yourself and your art. Full disclosure, Mrs. Nerdrotic follows this artist on Instagram and has communicated with her, so that's how I found out about it. Now, what I'm told is the artist of this cover, and I think it's atrocious, Robin Eisenberg, was an innocent party at first. She wasn't aware of all the controversy. This art was done prior to the cover being picked. It was actually picked by the DC editorial staff, who I blame for this because they knew what the reaction was going to be. Now, when Mrs. Nerdrotic and I discussed this, and again, she had been communicating with the artist, I said, if the artist doesn't kick the hornet's nest, again, you're going to be fine, but she went ahead and kicked the hornet's nest. Now, I'm not going to read her entire statement. We're just going to read the last part. Eisenberg concluded, the fact that this was so controversial just makes me want to continue to draw diverse body types and create more art that people can hopefully see themselves in. And of course, Miss Eisenberg is free to create any type of art she likes. I fully support it. Just because I don't like it doesn't mean it shouldn't exist. I don't care if she gets a cover. If I owned a store, I wouldn't purchase it. It's terrible, but maybe somebody likes it out there. That's fine. But the reason it was picked, Miss Eisenberg, was to piss off fans. You were used. DC knew exactly what kind of reaction they would get, and that's why they chose your cover. They picked your cover to piss off the customer, not for your talent. They picked you for the same reason they picked Daniel Kibblesmith, and he picked the names Snowflake and Safe Space for the very same reason they hired Zoe Quinn, not to create art that would sell in a comic shop, but to provoke the customer to create controversy on Twitter so they can gain more social currency. Now, I was speaking previously about a synergy to the universe. It tends to unfold as it should. Well, here's a tweet from the recently fired Andy Corey. Robin, I'm a DC editor, Not anymore, and I love your work. The reaction to the Wonder Woman cover on Twitter was provoked by a small group of trolls and is not representative of the larger, sophisticated, and enthusiastic readership I've come to know. Your art is inspiring and your response is wonderful. And this is one of the major reasons heads are rolling at DC right now, and no one is safe, and it's only the beginning. Now, Randall Stevenson, the other CEO at AT&T, brought this up at a conference call last October. Stevenson explained, "We're committed to an objective, diligent, and disciplined process. We'll analyze the merits of each of our businesses individually and as a part of the whole. But let me be clear, we have no sacred cows." March 16, 2020 is the day the comic crisis started, with a Brian Hibbs Facebook post pleading for Marvel, DC, and Diamond to do something. On the very same day, Marvel announced the new Warriors in Snowflake and Safe Space. I actually noticed this problem a couple of days prior to that, and I did a live stream. Link is right here. I heard that San Francisco was going to get locked down for a long period of time, and the first thing I thought about was comic shops. They were teetering on the edge already, and they couldn't afford something like this. Now we are months into this crisis. They had plenty of time to get together, Marvel, DC, Diamond, all the publishers, and hatch out a plan to save their industry, possibly reboot their industry to something maybe stronger, and instead they squabbled. They started whisper networks. They started blacklists. They started canceling each other. They started pledges to not set each other at work. All of that on top of what was killing the industry already, specifically with Marvel, overshipping, variants, constantly relaunching books, the overcommitment to Captain Marvel and other crap books like that. And when DC did try to do something different, break away from Diamond and create their own distributor, all comic shops did was bitch. Now the comic book industry is falling apart. Are you surprised at all? And guess what? There was a few people here on YouTube trying to wave our arms and warn you that this was going to happen. Some of us wanted to keep giving you money in the beginning, Marvel and DC. We just wanted you to improve your comics, to maybe make them for everyone, to be a little more neutral, and you gave us the finger. So now it's our turn, and I know there's innocent parties out there. This is not directed at you. This is directed squarely towards the Kelly Sue DeConnicks, the Tom Kings, the Dan Slotts, the Mark Wades, the Heather Antoses of the world, who helped destroy the industry that I love, the industry I want nothing to do with anymore. I raise a middle finger and I give you my most sincere fuck you. So while manga sales are going through the roof and heads are rolling at DC, we are witnessing the death of the American superhero comic. And do you want to know why the American superhero comic is dying? A, you hired a bunch of people who don't know anything about the American superhero comic. B, you hired a bunch of people who actively hate the American superhero comic. And C, the people who did like the American superhero comic wanted a work girlfriend and decided to hire editors who didn't know anything about the American superhero comic.
Nerdrotic.com. Please subscribe.